Yo, welcome back to the channel. Appreciate y'all for pulling up. So today we're gonna get into a more serious topic. You know, sometimes we get into a little bit of the drama and we talk about a little bit of the dating. We got yap sessions, things of that nature. But today I wanna get into the science, the psychological effect that social media has on us. I kind of want to do a deep dive on that and let's get a professional's viewpoint on that and just kind of open our brains up, open our minds up to what social media is actually doing to us. Let's get into the video.
Let's talk about dopamine. Most people have heard of dopamine, and we hear all the time now about dopamine hits. But actually, there's no such thing as a dopamine hit. And actually, the way that your body uses dopamine is to have a baseline level of dopamine, meaning an amount of dopamine that's circulating in your brain and body all the time. And that turns out to be important for how you feel generally, whether or not you're in a good mood, motivated, etc. And you also can experience peaks in dopamine above baseline. A simple way to envision dopamine hits is every time you do something you like, you eat a piece of chocolate, dopamine hit. You look at your Instagram, dopamine hit. You see someone you like, dopamine hit. You know, all these things described as dopamine hits neglect the fact that if you scroll social media and you see something you really like, dopamine hit. Sure, there's an increase in dopamine. But then you get to something else and you go, not that interesting. However, had you arrived at that second thing first, you might think that it was really interesting. If you had arrived to that second Instagram post 3 days later or 4 days later, you might find it extremely interesting.
I think on the topic of dopamine, I feel like social media and technology and overconsumption of media, as well as the easy access to a lot of things that we just did not have access to. For me as a kid who grew up in the area of technology, has given us that dopamine hit a lot, or too much of a dopamine hit. Yeah, maybe that's a better way I can word that. Too much of a dopamine hit to the point to where it doesn't even feel like a dopamine hit anymore because we're just overexposed to it. I mean, before you get on social media, you get a glance, like, wow, this is interesting. I just learned about this celebrity. I just learned that she cheated on this person, did that, and the third. But now it's so prevalent, it's so accessible that we've been so overexposed to it that maybe it's no longer a dopamine feeling. And you overexpose yourself by continuously scrolling through social media to get that fix, to get that hit, to relieve that boredom. I mean, I don't know one woman in my life that can't put the damn phone down. You gotta have that phone in their hand, and 9 times out of 10, they on social media scrolling because they're looking for something. I always wanted to tell a woman, "Hey, put your go." I always want to take a vacation with a woman who always on their phone and be like, "Hey, no access to your phone. Enjoy the cruise, enjoy life. Get out there and be yourself." And it's funny because I've learned to realize that not even just women, men and women use alcohol and drugs to get out of their comfort zone instead of pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. So if they don't have that, they sit in the corner lost, scared, like a sick puppy on their phone. And it's like, damn, why is nobody has the wherewithal to push themselves to get to that point? Why do they have to rely on some type of substance to be social? And I kind of veered off the topic a little bit there, but yeah, that's kind of the dopamine hit. I feel like people have been overexposed, and it no longer feels like a dopamine hit. It's just, or if it is a dopamine hit, they need excessive amounts, or they need some short form content to give them what they need, because that long form content rarely gives people that dopamine hit that they used to get, or just hopping on social media used to get that dopamine hit. Now it's like you're on there, you're scrolling. Next thing you know, 2 hours go by, and you got nothing out of it. Or you continue scrolling and then, you finally hit that 4 hour mark and you finally found a video. It's like, damn, this was good. That was good. And then you finally roll over and go to bed. It's crazy, man.
Again, how much dopamine you experience from something depends on your baseline level of dopamine when you arrive there and your previous dopamine peaks. Okay? That's super important to understand, and it's completely neglected by the general language of dopamine hits. This is why when you repeatedly engage in something that you enjoy, your threshold for enjoyment goes up and up and up.
Shit, this is what I just said. I swear I did not watch this video ahead of time. That's just the thought that came to my head. Dang, that's crazy. He literally saying what I just said.
So I want to talk about that process, and I want to explain how that process works, because if you understand that process and you understand some of these schedules and kinetics, as we call them, around dopamine, you will be in a terrific position to use any dopamine enhancing tools that you decide to use. You'll be in an excellent position to modulate and control your own dopamine release for optimal motivation and drive. So what sorts of activities, what sorts of things increase dopamine? And how much do they increase dopamine? Well, let's take a look at some typical things that people do out there or ingest out there that are known to increase dopamine. So let's recall that you have a baseline level of dopamine, and that everybody does. Your level of dopamine has everything to do with those genetics, but also with what you've experienced in the previous days and the previous months and so on. When you do or ingest certain things, your levels of dopamine will rise above baseline transiently. And depending on what you do or ingest, it will rise either more or less, and it will be very brief or it'll last a long time. So let's take a look at some of the typical things that people take and do and eat. Some are good for us, some are not.
So like examples of short-term dopamine hits for me is, I would say, probably eating a food that I really like. I feel like that's a short-term dopamine hit. Social media is a short-term dopamine hit. Long-term dopamine hits, I would probably say playing soccer. I feel like I get a serious high when I play sports. When I go to the gym, to me that feels like a long-term dopamine hit. Getting feeling some type of accomplishment, like when getting my schoolwork done. I feel like that's maybe it's a short-term dopamine hit. Maybe when you achieve that degree, maybe that's the long-term dopamine hit. But completing an assignment is more like short-term dopamine hit.
Good for us. And let's ask how much dopamine is increased above baseline. Chocolate. They didn't look at milk versus dark chocolate, but chocolate will increase your baseline level of dopamine 1.5 times. Okay, so it's a pretty substantial increase in dopamine. It's transient. It goes away after a few minutes or even a few seconds. I'll explain what determines the duration in a minute. But 1.5 times for chocolate. Sex. Both the pursuit of sex and the act of sex increases dopamine 2 times. So it's a doubling above baseline. Now, of course, there's going to be variation there, but
I did forget about sex. Sex is I feel like if you ever find that right person, I think it's short term regardless. If it's the right person or the wrong person, it's a short term dopamine hit. It's a good feeling in the moment, and then you kind of move on with your life.
That's the average increase in baseline dopamine caused by sex. Nicotine, in particular, nicotine that is smoked, like cigarettes and so forth.
Yeah, drugs is definitely a short-term dopamine hit, but it comes with the unfortunate circumstance of addiction, which a lot of things with dopamine you can become addicted to, but obviously this one's more on the negative side.
Increases dopamine 2.5 times above baseline. So there's a peak that goes up above baseline 2.5 times higher. It is very short-lived. Anyone who's ever been a chain smoker or observed a chain smoker understands that the increase in dopamine from nicotine is very short-lived. Cocaine will increase the level of dopamine in the bloodstream 2.5 times above baseline. And amphetamine, another drug that increases dopamine, will increase the amount of dopamine in the bloodstream 10 times above baseline.
Dang, really?
A tremendous increase.
More than cocaine?
Exercise.
Wow.
Now, exercise will have a different impact on the levels of dopamine depending on how much somebody subjectively enjoys that exercise. So if you're somebody who loves running, chances are it's going to increase your levels of dopamine 2 times above your baseline.
So lifting weights
Not
is
unlike
2 times.
sex.
Running is 0. I hate running, but
People
I get it
who
done.
dislike exercise will achieve less dopamine increase or no increase in dopamine.
That makes
from
sense.
exercise.
Yeah, because you push it
And if
through
you
it.
like other forms of exercise like yoga or weightlifting or swimming or what have you, again, it's going to vary by your subjective experience of whether or not you enjoy that activity. All right. So, for instance, the pen that I'm holding right now, it's one of these Pilot V5s. I love these Pilot V5s. They don't sponsor the podcast, but I just happen to like them. I like the way that they write, how they feel. If I spent enough time thinking about it or talking about it, I could probably get a dopamine increase just talking about this Pilot V5. And that's not because I have the propensity to release dopamine easily. It's that as we start to engage with something more and more, and what we say about it and what we encourage ourselves to think about it has a profound impact on its rewarding or non-rewarding properties. Now, it's not simply the case that you can lie to yourself and you can tell yourself, I love something, and when you don't really love it, and it will increase dopamine. But what's been found over and over again is that if people journal about something or they practice some form of appreciation for something or they think of some aspect of something that they enjoy, the amount of dopamine that that behavior will evoke tends to go up. So for people that hate exercise, you can think about some aspect of exercise that you really enjoy. However, I will caution you against saying to yourself, I hate exercise, or I hate studying, or I hate this person, but I love the reward I give myself afterward. Rewards given afterward actually make the situation worse. They won't make you like exercise more or studying more. They actually will undermine the dopamine release that would otherwise.
I just learned something new. Wow. Because I'm definitely that type where it's like, damn, I hate cardio. Damn, I hate cardio. Damn, I hate cardio. But I love the effects that I get from cardio or after finishing cardio. You know, you get shape, you get your heart rate up, you burn more calories, you build more endurance. But boy, I cannot stand cardio unless it's unconsciously doing cardio. For example, like playing basketball, playing soccer, playing football. For me, I'm unconsciously doing cardio because I'm more focused on the objective of the sport that I'm playing. But just going out there and running, oh my God, I can't stand it, bro. I can't stand it because I know the only thing I'm doing is running, and I'm doing it for a reason. But obviously the end goal is to build that endurance, get in shape, build that dream physique. But it's the fact that I have to run to get there when I could unconsciously run playing basketball and get the same results. Yeah, I hope you understand what I'm saying there.
Occur for that activity. There are activities that we can do that will give us healthy, sustained increases in dopamine, both the peaks when they happen and to maintain or even increase our baseline levels of dopamine. So how do we do that? In recent years, there's been a trend toward more people doing so-called cold exposure. In part, this was popularized by Wim Hof, the so-called Iceman, getting into cold showers, taking ice baths, exposing oneself to cold water of various kinds, can in fact increase our levels of dopamine as well as the neuromodulator norepinephrine. What temperature of water you can tolerate will depend on how cold water adapted you are and how familiar you are with the experience of getting into cold water. Please remember this, that when you experience something or you crave something really desirable, really exciting to you, very pleasurable, what happens afterwards is your baseline level of dopamine drops. Okay, so these peaks in dopamine, they influence how much dopamine will generally be circulating afterward. And you might think, oh, a big peak in dopamine, after that, I'm going to feel even better because I just had this great event. Not the case. What actually happens is that your baseline level of dopamine drops. Dopamine doesn't act alone. Dopamine has close cousins or friends in the nervous system, and I'll just name off a few of those close cousins and friends. Epinephrine, also called adrenaline, is the main chemical driver of energy. We can't do anything at all, unless we have some level of epinephrine in our brain and body. So it should come as no surprise that dopamine and epinephrine, aka adrenaline, hang out together. In fact, epinephrine and adrenaline are actually manufactured from dopamine. What dopamine does is dopamine really colors the subjective experience of an activity to make it more pleasurable, to make it something that you want more of. Epinephrine is more about energy. If your dopamine is too low, you will not feel motivated. If your dopamine is really high, you will feel motivated. And
I didn't know that the dopamine played a factor on your energy levels. I just learned something new. There's some days when they just don't feel motivated, bro. And that could be dopamine levels are low. And from what he's saying, it sounds like when you're overexposed to dopamine, your dopamine levels become lower. Interesting.
If your dopamine is somewhere in the middle, how you feel depends on whether or not you had higher dopamine a few minutes ago or lower dopamine. This is important. Your experience of life and your level of motivation and drive depends on how much dopamine you have relative to your recent experience. There will be other factors too, but the level of dopamine is the primary determinant of how motivated we are, how excited we are, how outward facing we are, and how willing we are to lean into life and pursue things.
W video. I fucked with it heavy. And that last point, they ended off, was a perfect way to end it off. It's our willingness to want to lean into life, try new things, try new, just jump into new opportunities. Don't be so hesitant. Don't be so closed off. Like, once again, I learned a lot from that video. I didn't know that dopamine had that much of an effect on us as individuals and our overall energy in our bodies. I learned something new. I hope y'all learned something new. If you did, drop a like. Try something a little different this time. But other than that, take it easy.